Taking pictures of women killed in the most tragic possible circumstances and then making lewd comments about their underwear. Unwanted explicit pictures, routine misogyny and requests for sexual favours in return for a promotion. The completely shocking, utterly depressing story of the Dorset and Wilts Fire Service.
Anytime I asked for help or guidance or a meeting, I would be told that it would cost me sexual favours. Meetings would be arranged and I would be told to get naked or do a sexual favour.
And no, says the chief, I don't think my force does have a problem with women.
I don't accept that we have a problem. I think that we have had some challenging times. We have addressed issues.
Another startling exclusive from Paul leaves a few simple questions. Genuinely, what is wrong with these people? And why on earth are there so many of them in the fire service and indeed the police? Also on News at 10 tonight. School is out. Teachers at a strike on a day of huge walkouts all over the country tomorrow. A shocking and frankly humiliating IMF prediction. Our economy will perform worse than every leading nation this year, trailing even Russia. Vanished into China's deeply murky judicial system. Debbie has a special report on the fate of some of the nation's brave COVID protesters. And the new Beaver Creek on the shores of Loch Lomond.
We believe that the 7 beavers are in there sleeping right now, which is why I'm whispering. And no one has seen anything like this at this part of Loch Lomond for more than 400 years.
This is DanTV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It is hard to think of many jobs where trust matters more. Firefighters rely on one another to keep themselves and, of course, us safe. But now the police have been called in to investigate claims of a gross betrayal of that trust within the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service. Male firefighters are said to have photographed the bodies of women killed in car crashes they attended and swapped WhatsApp messages about the women's underwear. We've also heard from female firefighters who say their male colleagues make unwanted sexual demands and sent them sexually explicit photos. How must that make them feel as they stand alongside them in the path of the flames? They have come forward after we first highlighted sexism and misogyny in South Wales, and they are very much not alone. Paul and his team have told us tonight they have heard from female firefighters in forces across the country.
In picture after picture, they expose themselves to female colleagues. Tonight, their victims reveal this behaviour to you.
I feel as a woman when I go to work, it's like open season.
It makes you feel like you can't trust any firefighter anymore.
It's everywhere. It's rife.
They're talking, in voices we've distorted, about the scale of sexual harassment at Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service.
So I've had a number of senior members of staff send me explicit pictures, and it's not just myself, it's other people as well.
Was there even a suggestion that you might be interested in receiving these pictures?
No, absolutely not. I'd never want to see a picture like that. And it repulses you, and then you have to go back to work. You have to sit with this person on the truck, you have to go to fire calls with them, and you know the way they feel.
The messages we've seen portray disturbing persistence.
You love the attention. You love it, don't you?
The women make clear they don't, and yet it escalates.
I believe you'll fall for my charm and good looks. Can tell you definitely fancy me.
Until eventually it becomes threatening.
Wish it was us, although probably safer for you that it's not. I would have groped you, although I doubt you'd mind. I'll have you one day.
It is all part of the currency for career progression, according to another woman we spoke to.
Anytime I asked for help or guidance or a meeting, I would be told that it would cost me sexual favours and I would be told to get naked.
Battling harassment even while fighting fires.
So we were at the scene, the crew had been sent away to fill up the appliance with water, which meant that I was left alone with a particular officer on site. And whilst we were alone, he was trying to kiss me and then said, if we hurry up, then you can give me sexual favours before they come back.
But what we can reveal tonight goes further than the fire station. We've seen evidence that in some cases, firefighters sent to help women have chosen to humiliate them, even photographing their bodies at the scene where they've died and sharing the images on WhatsApp.
There's explicit pictures, there's photos of accidents. Sometimes you can even see the dead body in the accident. Retrieving the body of someone dead should tear you apart, not make you want to take photos about it just to joke about it later. Because it's someone's loved one, isn't it? Someone's relative.
What kind of comments are they making about the person who's died?
I've seen people say comments about the type of underwear the women are wearing in the car crash. Disgust me that I have to work alongside people like this.
Following those specific claims, tonight this emergency service is being investigated by another. Dorset and Wiltshire's chief fire officer has reported the allegations to the police.
I'm saddened, I'm shocked and I'm appalled, and I'm grateful for you bringing them to our attention, and the assurance I'll give you is that we will look into these allegations, we will follow the evidence and we will do the right thing.
Do you accept that your service does seem to have a problem with women?
I don't accept that we have a problem. I think that we have had some challenging times, we have addressed issues.
But sexual harassment, taking photos at scenes where women have died, that sounds like a problem.
Well, clearly that is completely inappropriate, and those matters that you've raised with us, we believe, are likely to have led to be a criminal offence. And I've also in the process of commissioning an independent review of this matter, and I'll give you my personal assurance that we will get to the bottom of this.
But for the women facing this harassment, the word of the fire service hasn't always carried weight.
It's gone on for years and years now, and it's always made to disappear. And I know it's not just my service.
There will be a time, and it will come quite soon, where something really bad is going to happen. I would feel dreadful if somebody ended up taking their own life or somebody was raped, because this is where we're headed.
And Paul is here. Look, I don't know where to even start with that. I mean, I think people are going to be so shocked, frankly so depressed about it. I guess it leaves one question above all, like, how widespread is this? Is this, first of all, South Wales, now Dorset and Wilts, is that it? Or are there were, you said to me earlier there were forces across the country.
Yeah, it's not it. I can say that for certain, Tom. We are talking about a minority rather than a majority of firefighters, and this minority trades on that kind of hero status that many in the service thoroughly deserve for the job that they do, but they use that status to abuse their power. And we've heard stories from up and down the country. You mentioned South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, which we reported on just before Christmas. They're having an independent review now of their culture because of sexual harassment and abuse of women there. And we're starting to get a kind of pattern because of the number of stories we're being sent in from across the country. That pattern, for example, seems to manifest itself in women being told that they can trade sexual favours for career progression, women being silenced and pushed out of the service if they speak up. There are very few women on the front line of the fire service. It's incredibly intimidating to speak out as a female firefighter. And there are questions for the inspectorate tonight that inspects fire services too, because they said just last week that Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service was good when it came to its culture. Tonight they say they are deeply concerned by our reporting. So, what were they missing, quite frankly, when they inspected? The Labour Party want a national review of fire service culture. The biggest questions, of course, tonight come from the police and what they are able to uncover in terms of the allegations that we've made. My fear is that some of the evidence will have been deleted because some within the fire service were alerted and spread the rumour and spread the news that they were being looked into. But what they can't erase is the bravery of the women who are finally putting this in the spotlight.
OK, Paul, once again, thank you very much indeed. Now, as Paul was saying, his investigation relies on people getting in touch to expose such behaviour in our fire service and indeed other services perhaps too. There is an email address, investigations@itv.com, investigations@itv.com for anyone else who'd like to get in touch. Now, the biggest strike day for a decade will be held tomorrow. 500,000 people from 7 different unions won't be at work as they campaign for better pay and condition. Foremost amongst them are teachers in England and Wales. They will be losing a day's pay, of course, but so too will many parents forced to stay at home with their children. And more strikes by ambulance workers, amongst others, have been announced for next week.
In a season of public service strikes, tomorrow's will be the biggest and most disruptive, with schools and universities closing, job centres shut, trains not running, buses halted, in total perhaps 500,000 people refusing to work. One school closing tomorrow is Millfield Primary in Walsall.
It's very disappointing that it has come to this. Having said that, I'm not disappointed that my staff are taking this action. I totally support them.
You know, I'm a widowed mum. I cannot afford to lose the pay, but I cannot afford to lose all of my experienced colleagues either.
What did Joanne, a parent, think of the strike?
Absolutely fine with it. I'll lose money myself, obviously being self-employed. It's an inconvenience to my customers, me not being there. However, I think that things have got to get better.
The school's minister begs to differ.
Going on strike is not the way to conduct pay negotiations in a modern economy, particularly when it means disrupting a child's education and disrupting the lives of families up and down the country.
Wednesday's strikes will involve 127,000 teachers in England and Wales at more than 23,000 schools. 70,000 university staff at 150 UK universities, train drivers at 14 rail companies, 1,900 London bus drivers and 100,000 civil servants, including job centres and borders. As for the economic cost of the past 8 months of strikes, one estimate puts it at £1.9 billion and rising.
The argument of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister is if they were to increase public sector pay, that would stoke inflation. Are they right?
I think it's quite hard to make the argument that certainly giving increases a bit more than are currently being offered would really stoke inflation. There's no need for public pay to lag a long way behind private pay as it is at the moment.
The leader of the Civil Servants Union told me his members are prepared to sustain industrial action for months.
Give me the big reason why your members are so angry.
It's a real crisis of the cost of living. 40,000 civil servants are using food banks, and last week, astonishingly, 47,000 civil servants in just 2 government departments were put on the national minimum wage because their pay has been driven down so much over the last 10 years. So what the government need to do is put money on the table now.
When schools shut at a time of industrial action in all our vital public services, our lives may be disrupted, but we have to wonder whether we're paying nearly enough to those in the public services we count on to keep the UK educated, healthy and wealthy. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Now, higher energy costs and higher mortgage rates are 2 of the reasons unions are wanting significant pay rises, of course. They were also listed today by the International Monetary Fund as factors in suppressing economic growth in the UK, together with higher taxes and a smaller post-Brexit workforce. The IMF says ours is the only major economy that will contract this year. Even Russia's, yes, Russia will grow, despite being constrained by sanctions. And Joel is here to talk about it. Let's be honest, this is profoundly embarrassing. What is going on?
If the IMF is right, Tom, it will be extremely embarrassing because almost every nation in the world is a member of the International Monetary Fund. Its job is to scan the horizon for signs of economic trouble and bail out governments in distress. Now, the good news is the IMF says the global economic outlook is less gloomy. The bad news is it identified the UK as the exception to that rule. The IMF expects the UK to be the only advanced economy in the world to slide into recession this year. It placed us right at the bottom of its growth table. Even Russia, as Tom was saying there, is expected to grow faster. There are a number of reasons why the IMF thinks our prospects look so dim. The UK is particularly dependent on natural gas as a source of energy, and that leaves us exposed, of course, to higher market prices. Unusually, we're also one of only a few countries that's had a workforce that is smaller than before the pandemic. And interest rates have risen aggressively in the UK because inflation has been so persistent, which has intensified the squeeze on our living standards. And the IMF says Brexit has damaged trade, flattened business investment and made it harder to recruit EU workers. As it happens, of course, we left the EU 3 years ago. Tonight, the government points out that forecasting is a bit of a mug's game and that the IMF underestimated UK growth last year, which is true. In a statement, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said short-term challenges should not obscure our long-term prospects, which he insists are bright. But a lot of economists disagree. Michael Saunders used to set interest rates at the Bank of England.
The UK, for about 10 years, has been stuck in a low growth rut with very little growth of living standards. And really the prospects for the next couple of years are more of the same. Yeah, we might have a year in which the economy grows, but growth will be slow. And with that, people's living standards will not improve much.
So the immediate future looks grim, but the IMF says the government and the Bank of England are pursuing the right strategy to tame inflation. The bank, of course, is expected to raise interest rates yet again on Thursday. Meanwhile, the impact of higher borrowing costs is already being felt. The number of mortgages approved by UK banks slumped to 35,000 in December. It was last at this level during lockdown in 2020. It's a pretty clear sign, Tom, that the housing market here is slowing very sharply.
OK, Joel, thank you very much. Not good news, but thank you all the same. Let's put a lot of that to Robert. Robert, you heard what Joel was saying there. We talked last night about how many people in the country, according to the polls, do seem to be regretting Brexit. But let's face it, there are lots of headwinds around. What did you make of today's news on strikes and indeed the IMF's prediction?
So we're not going to go over the negative impact of Brexit again tonight. And, you know, the first thing to say is I don't think we need the IMF to tell us that times are tough here. We can all feel it. And just to be clear, the IMF, like all forecasters, it's a forecast. It may not necessarily turn out to be the case that we will be worst in pack this year. For example, there is quite a lot of uncertainty about its relative optimism about China as it comes out of those dreadful COVID restrictions that have been imposed. The Chinese economy may not grow as fast as they say. Actually, that's bad news for the whole world, not just China itself. I thought one of the important things that Joel picked up on was the way that the UK workforce unusually is so much smaller than we expected it to be before the pandemic. It's about 1 million people smaller than before the pandemic. So one of the big announcements that we're all waiting for is from the Chancellor, we expected in the budget, are new measures to encourage people, older people who retired early, the long-term sick, to encourage them back to work. Look, the outlook is definitely difficult, but this is not a government with no levers at all, although as far as Tory MPs are concerned, and we heard that from them tonight when they were grilling the Chancellor, they want him to cut taxes as a stimulus. He has said no, not yet, not for at least a year.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on to the state of the NHS, which has faced a number of strikes, of course. In normal times, roughly 1 in 20 999 calls for an ambulance are follow-ups to find out when it will arrive. Well, our research into ambulance trust documents shows that over the worst of the winter's delays, that rose to 5 in 20 in certain parts of the country.
Ambulance workers are preparing to walk out again next week. But today, they were heading into Parliament to meet ministers and MPs and tell them just how bad they feel things are right now.
I've been in the ambulance service now for 24 years and I've never seen anything like this.
It's quite terrifying at the moment. So I can dispatch and I can see a job on my screen like a non-injury full patient on the floor, and I can go home at the end of my 12-hour shift and then come back the next day and that job's still on my screen, yeah.
So how long could they have been lying on the floor?
Potentially 17, 18, 24 hours.
Now ITV News has scoured through hundreds of board papers released by ambulance trusts across England that underline the true scale of this winter's crisis. The papers showed that in the West Midlands, the number of repeat 999 calls asking, "Where is my ambulance?" had risen fivefold from 5 to 25% of the total. The North West Ambulance Service believed a lack of available resources had contributed in some way to 5 patient deaths. In the North East, staff were urged to divert patients from emergency departments wherever possible. And in the South Central region, the frontline attrition of staff leaving the service was 18.4% in December, a doubling in 2 years. You're going to see MPs in Parliament. If you see the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, what will you say to him?
Help us.
Today, the GMB Union have written to Parliament's Health Select Committee outlining those statistics and warning that ambulance services are in a state of crisis. They say patient safety is at risk under the status quo. Inside, ambulance workers, including some union reps, had to settle for Health Minister Will Quince. But they found Steve Barclay too.
For paramedics, actually, interestingly, and it's only an anecdote, so I won't say this applies to all areas, but when I was visiting one station recently, their frustration with the length of handover delays, they said was a greater issue for them than pay. That wasn't to say pay wasn't a factor.
Matthew Holbert doesn't know if lying on the floor for 11 hours waiting for an ambulance contributed to his mum Jackie's death.
In a situation where you feel like you have very little control over what is happening, your relative is suffering, the one thing you feel like you can do every few hours is to call 999 again and say, this person is still distressed.
The GMB said trusts also made clear that deals with the unions on strike days did let them put patient safety first. They say conditions are part of the issue, but only pay will solve these strikes. Anoush Gristana, News at 10.
There has been a deadly dog attack this evening on a 4-year-old girl in Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire. She was very sadly pronounced dead shortly after 5 o'clock at a house in the city. The dog has been destroyed and no arrest has been made. No one else was hurt. Now, when millions of Chinese people fanned out across the country for the Lunar New Year, there was real anxiety the mass migration would spread coronavirus after restrictions were lifted. But according to its Centre for Disease Control, it simply didn't happen. However, dozens of young people whose protests prompted that very lifting of restrictions have not been able to benefit. Instead, teachers, accountants and other young professionals have simply vanished into China's murky judicial system.
They were the protests which helped sink China's zero-COVID policy. Hundreds of people in 31 different cities took to the streets at the end of November to demand an end to the country's crippling restrictions. Their white sheets of paper, a symbol for everything they dared not say. A picture is now emerging of the young professionals who could soon be behind bars for taking part in those peaceful demonstrations. They are 20-something well-educated men and women whose futures are at risk. Jai Dongrui is a teacher in Beijing. She was detained on the 22nd of December and placed under arrest. Xin Xiang was detained on the 7th of January. The film artist who went to university in London drew the attention of the police by reading a Shakespeare sonnet. Li Yuanjin is also known by her English name Nina. She graduated from a top university in Australia and works at the accountancy firm PwC. A friend of Nina's agreed to talk to us if we protected his identity.
She's quite nice and always friendly, not really like critical or radical on any issues. And actually, after the protest, they were questioned like for 24 hours and then released.
But then she was rearrested.
Yeah, like in middle or late December, a lot of them were arrested.
Nina's arrest was confirmed by Sao Jixin in the chilling video she released predicting her disappearance. It has gone viral everywhere but in China, where her brave words have been censored.
定罪我们的证据是什么？在没有罪证的前提下，为什么我们可以被这样轻易地带走？
We can't say for certain how many people have been detained. The friends and family of those tracked down by police have been warned to stay silent. So far, more than 50 names have been made public. In Beijing, most have been processed at the Chaoyang detention centre. The crime being levelled at protesters is called picking quarrels and provoking trouble. It sounds like a playground offence, but it carries a sentence of up to 5 years for a first-time offender. The Chinese judicial system has a near 100% conviction rate, so anyone being held here on criminal charges knows they're likely facing some time in prison. Former human rights lawyer Yu Wen-sheng believes the charge of subverting state power could also be used. He was released from jail last year after serving 5 years on similar charges.
Anything you say could be framed as the crime of picking quarrels or subverting the state, but actually in China, the law supports freedom of speech.
This week, the Chinese government declared the current outbreak almost over. Infections are down, and the economy, they said, is going back up. But as the rest of the country appears to move on, there are dozens of young people whose lives have ground to a halt. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Beijing.
A follow-up now to our report last night about the controversy surrounding the Oscar nomination for the British actor Andrea Riseborough. This evening, the Oscar organisers, the Academy of Motion Pictures, agreed that her Best Actress nomination could indeed stand, despite concerns within the film industry about social media lobbying for the star of the film to Leslie. But the Academy has launched an investigation into social media tactics. Finally, they haven't needed planning permission, but a couple with 5 children began work today building their own home in one of the most scenic locations in Britain. They'll be using natural and sustainable materials, and their lifelong training as engineers. They are, in case you're wondering, a family of beavers. The location of their new home, Loch Lomond. It is the latest place in Scotland where the once extinct rodents are being reintroduced.
On the bonny banks of Loch Lomond, beavers are back. When their ancestors disappeared from this landscape, Mary, Queen of Scots, still reigned. But these new kits on the block have just been relocated here from Tayside. A family of 7 eager beavers, and they didn't hang around. No time for goodbyes when there are dams to build. Without beavers, the UK lost 90% of wetlands. We now know they preserve peat bogs like this, an ally against climate change.
Peatland soils, etc., hold carbon, which is really important, obviously, for the climate. So it shows you the link between climate and nature and how the two are kind of part of the same life support system, really. Basically, wherever you get beavers, you get benefits for wildlife. Other species, whether it be amphibians, fish, insects, birds, do well where you get beavers.
The beavers have been busy. A hidden camera shows these nocturnal animals collecting midnight snacks. It was a hop, skip and a juggle with some apples they found.
So beavers are ecosystem engineers, and they will adapt the environment around them to suit the things they need, in terms of finding food or making places to sleep. And in fact, look, just over here, there's some signs on the branch of where they've been chewing.
So right there, you can see that.
Just right there.
The teeth marks.
I've been working in nature conservation for nearly 20 years, and it can sometimes seem like an uphill struggle. We're hearing lots about species loss, habitat loss, climate change, and this really feels like something where we're making a positive difference and gives us hope for the future.
Just on the other side of this river are the early stages of the beavers building a lodge. That's a beaver home. We believe that the 7 beavers are in there sleeping right now, which is why I'm whispering, and no one has seen anything like this at this part of Loch Lomond for more than 400 years. Nature's engineers will in time create underwater tunnels, manage water flows and help other wildlife flourish here better than the hand of man ever could. In saving British wetlands, humans have learned we can leave it to beavers. Peter Smith, News at 10, Loch Lomond.
Well, at least there was one happy story in the bulletin tonight. Thank God for the Beavers. That's it. Coming up after the local news is the first on assignment of the year with special reports from John Ray, Dan Rivers in Australia and Raggy Omar. It's a brilliant programme. Do watch. That's it. Good night. Thank you.